Who are we? Well, I'm Bernie. I'm a retired senior executive from the trucking transportation industry, former classmate of my partner in crime, Dick. And we hope to provide a senior perspective to people of all ages on the current events of the day, and also some anecdotal stuff and some humor, I hope.
Okay, I'm Dick. I'm 74. I'm a retired military officer. After leaving the military, I taught high school for 15 years, basically psychology, and I'm not happy the way the world is going. Well,
Hi, Dick.
hi, Bernie. What's up today?
Oh, let's see here. This is podcast 7.
I believe so.
Well, that's pretty good. We're moving along in this series. First off, congratulations to you and Millie on your wedding anniversary tomorrow.
Oh, thank you.
I think anybody that can go 102 years of marital bliss is amazing.
Well, it all has to do with the trapeze and the mirrors.
There you go. Yeah. And whatever it is you smoke before you get in bed, right?
Yes.
Hey, I had a thought today, and it's not unique to me because you've mentioned it several times briefly, but nonetheless mentioned it. And that is, I thought today maybe we'd talk about the state of education in this country, public education, elementary, high school, even college, unfortunately, as it relates to instruction in civics and history, American history in particular, but history overall, world history in general. What do you think of that?
Well, I have always said that those that don't understand or know history are due to relive it. And the sad thing is if you don't learn from the past, you're going to apply the same thing in the future, and you're going to get the same lousy results. You know, to do the same thing and expect different results ain't going to happen.
Right. I read an interesting quote of Abraham Lincoln's. He said, if someone's going to give me 6 hours to cut down a tree, I'm going to spend the first 4 hours sharpening my axe. Let that sink in, folks, who are listening to us.
I don't understand. It's kind of deep for me.
Well, I would say that particularly these man on the street videos.
Oh, God.
Particularly college-age students, but of course, college-age students are young adults who came up through the ranks of elementary and high school. But there are a lot of dull axe blades out there. So I think people, if they were to read history, might take a page out of Lincoln's book and devote themselves to sharpening the axe a little more.
Well, it's kind of interesting because yesterday Millie was talking, she was doing Red Cross volunteer work. She was talking about the young people that were there. And I'm going, you know, what were they? How old were they? Well, I don't know. I'm going, well, why are you calling them young people? And she said, well, they look young. It turned out we have a new program where every high school student has to do a year of community service, and you get points for volunteering. And these were students 16 about that were doing their volunteer work. And all she could figure out was that they were young people. And I guess when you reach our age, you don't know what young people are.
Yeah, but yeah, people in their 40s look young to me.
Well, yeah. You know, I see these people wheeling babies down the street and everything, and I'm going, oh my God, this is ridiculous. And it turns out they're all like 20, you know,
Right.
everybody 20. Oh God, anybody between anything, they all look young. It's ridiculous. Let me talk a minute quickly and make my pontification, although I'm not a Catholic, so the pontiff has nothing to do with it. I want to talk about,
I am a Catholic, and it's just as well the pontiff has nothing to do with it.
okay, well, you know, I'm looking at social studies. And when I was a kid, everybody hated social studies because we had to memorize dates. What happened here? What happened then? What about the French Revolution? Never really knew, never really cared. But what seems to have happened is as I went through the system, you know, I got into high school and we started to talk about the effects of different events, quote, social studies. By the time I went to college, Claremont was really good on that because you looked at events, you looked at the cause of the event, the implementation of corrective action or whatever, and the effect of events so that you learn what worked. And I keep on harping on Eisenhower's wetback program for immigration. Of course, you can't use the term wetback because it's a racial stereotype.
Yeah, it's not politically correct. So
Yeah, true. But the point
even
is,
though they're drowning by the dozens in the Rio Grande as we speak.
well, true. But you know, if you look at it, it worked. And why do we continue to reinvent something that doesn't work?
Well, I'm going to try to, don't laugh, folks, try to steer clear of just pure political commentary today. But since you threw that out, I've got to say this. The reason the Biden administration is not borrowing from what Dwight David Eisenhower did is because they don't want it to work. It's come one, come all, it's open borders, and they're not looking for quote unquote corrective action. So I don't know that that's in the context of today's times a good analogy because I don't think Biden is a historian. We know he wasn't a good student, and he takes his direction from the most radical elements of our society. So in terms of today's topic, I think Biden's an outlier. I don't know what he did in the classroom, maybe just sat and ate ice cream cones.
Well, you know, the question still becomes, because I'm trying to be positive, you know, what
I want to be positive too.
yeah, well, but what can we do? You know, what, well, that leads to two questions. Why don't they want it to work? Number one. And number two, what's the alternative?
Well, I don't know that this responds directly to your question, but I think there's two primary issues. One is very difficult in today's political environment. That would be to get the federal government out of education. I mean, the federal government consistently screws up most everything they touch. And I, you know, that's one of the reasons the, you know, in poll after poll after poll, Congress is rated below 10% approval rating, depending on who you're talking to. So getting them out of education would be very difficult. But nonetheless, I think the Department of Education ought to go by the wayside. To me, education is local. So my second response to you, and I think this is more easy, is to take back control of local school boards and not only control them better, but make sure that the right people are put in administrative positions and as principals and, you know, as teachers. There's, you know, today in our classrooms, and this does tie with our topic today, history as an example. In so many school boards, they've adopted the New York Times 1619 view of America, which is not 1776, but 1619 when the first slave ship came to the country. So that's pushing the notion that America was founded on a mortal sin, namely slavery, and that everything was done to perpetuate slavery. And then the other issue, and you've talked about it, Dick, and probably more eloquently than I, is the programs now to put race in the forefront in public education. And I'm not talking about diversity in the classroom. I'm talking about where everything, and no pun intended here, seriously, no pun intended, everything is colored by skin pigmentation as opposed to fact and what actually happened, a century ago, 2 centuries ago, at the founding of our country. What the Revolutionary War was all about, what the Civil War was all about, what was on the minds of our great leaders. Today, it's all about they were slave owners, and we ought to purge them from the public square, tear down the monuments. I mean, can you imagine? I've been to Washington, D.C. Have you, Dick?
Yes, many times.
Okay, well, I've been there, I think, half a dozen times, maybe. Who would want to take down, bulldoze the Jefferson Memorial or the Lincoln Memorial? I mean, it's just gone too far. And to me, people, and it's the rabid left, of course, but people who want to take down statues of Robert E. Lee don't understand who Robert E. Lee was, what he was all about, that he was a patriot, but in the context of the times, and Lincoln wanted him to be his commander of the Northern Army in the Civil War, but he declined because his first loyalty was to the state of Virginia, whereas they like to call it Old Virginia. And there was a reason for that. And that's because in that particular time in our history, people still thought of themselves more in the context of the state they lived in than the notion of a federal union of innumerable states. I don't think I said that well, but I think you know what I'm getting at.
Well,
But
yeah.
I'd be the first to say, there are statues going down of people that I wasn't particularly fond of. Henry Clay. I don't think we should tear down Henry Clay's statue any more than we should tear down a statue of, I don't know, Teddy Roosevelt or one of the great liberals of all time, President Wilson. So I'll be quiet and give you a chance.
Well, what's been getting me lately, and again, being military, is that they're moving forward with renaming places that have Southern connections, like Fort Gregg. I don't know what they're going to call it, Fort Lovey-Dovey or whatever. That bothers me. But you answered number 2 pretty well, but number 1 still comes to mind. Why have we gotten to this state, and what's the payoff for the left, and what are the effects on the country?
Well, what the reason I think your question there is twofold. One, how did we get where we're at? If you're talking in the sense of how did we get to the Department of Education, That's because the federal government wants to control every aspect, and not just in our current times, but even in the past. And we saw this immeasurably change during the Roosevelt administration in the 30s. Franklin Delano Roosevelt moved the country very fast in the direction of more federal control. And the fact is as is true of so many things, and one of the things that comes to mind is the U.S. Post Office. I mean, what an inept service that is, and a money loser. But things the unwieldy federal government touches, a federal government based on the eastern side of the country, it screws up. So hence, we decided we needed a Department of Education, and we don't. Education should be local. Education should be as near and dear to property owners, and particularly parents of young children, as anything else that concerns them in government. Taxes or benefits. I mean, you want your children educated, and not everybody can afford to send their children to private schools. So I think that needs to be closed. But in terms of what's been corrupted, I think that's the other element of your question, is we need to accept that the left are Marxists and anarchists. And it's not just a different philosophical view of how best to run the country. It's all about incessant criticism of our country, incessant criticism of its core principles, the foundations of the Union. And they want to, in Obama's words, significantly transform a country that, in my view, and as Reagan said, was a shining city on the hill, and was a country of exceptionalism. And I don't think you can look out on the landscape of the country today and feel that way about it. And I think, and this I have talked about, the big engine of change, even more than the federal government, has been the educational system. In large measure, it's churning out radical liberals, people bent on the destruction of the country and things that were good about it. And,
Yes, but can we depend on local? I grew up in Minnesota, where, there were boards of education for every area, and everything ran everything. But can we depend on local school boards to correct this educational mess?
Well, yes, with the right people. The issue is you got to wake up the voters and get past the apathy and get people involved. And that's sadly been the issue. I mean, parents ought to be going to PTA meetings, ought to be going to school board meetings, ought to be kibitzing classrooms, find out what's going on, asking about the kids' homework.
Well, it used to be that way.
That's why I'm saying it. I'm thinking back to you and I were in elementary school in the 50s. I say that with
Yeah.
see the wrinkles, folks. But how did you start the classroom day?
Pledge of Allegiance.
You stood next to your desk and you put your hand over your heart and you recited the Pledge of Allegiance. That's
Yes.
and God hadn't been excised, chased from the classroom. I mean, things have really gone crazy. I had I thought about this today in trying to get my mind around this podcast we were going to tape. I worked for a company and in the vice president of sales and marketing. I enjoyed him a lot because he was well read and I like to read. And we were at dinner one night. We weren't with clients, and he was talking about a biography he was reading on a president, and he made the comment to me. He said, "You know, these not anybody. You know the old cliche that anybody can grow up in America and become president." And he was basically saying that that's not really true. It's a nice thought, but these are exceptional people, well-educated, sharp intellect, movers and shakers, et cetera, et cetera. And I thought about that today, and I thought about that in the context of Joe Biden, who did very poorly in the classroom, all the way up through law school. And a lot has changed. And I may be beating it to death, but whether it was Jay Leno when he was on the old The Night Show doing the man on the street, or the guy from Waterworld on Fox News has done some of these, or you could go on YouTube and any number of people have come up with various topics. I'm always interested in the ones that ask just basic questions about our country. You know, what is the Constitution, or what is the Declaration of Independence, or why do we have July 4th as a celebration? It's incredible how many people have no idea, or they can't name a Supreme Court justice, or they may know the president, but they don't know the president who was assassinated in the 60s, or they don't know who the 16th president was. I mean, unless you know 1 through 15, you probably can't figure out who 16 is. Of course, it was Abraham Lincoln. But I mean, it's stunning how ill-informed people are and unschooled in history and civics nowadays.
Well, you're trying to be positive, and we've already talked about local school boards. You know, how do we fix this mess?
One way to fix it, and you know, you can shoot at me on this one. Anybody can self-educate, or almost anyone. I mean, obviously, we all need teachers and mentors. Those among us who have had good teachers and good mentors, I think, are better off and for the experience. But Abraham Lincoln was self-taught on Euclidean geometry. He read Euclid. I mean, he didn't have a teacher. He didn't go to a schoolhouse. That's true of most of his education, including studying for the law, or as they used the term back in those days, reading the law. But Euclidean geometry. Now, I happen to like geometry, and I got an A in it. But I needed a teacher, and I had a pretty good one.
You know, it's funny because it's the only class I've ever flunked in my life. And I had to go to summer school in high school for geometry. I still hate it. I don't understand it. You know, aside from, you know, C squared equals whatever, I don't have a clue. But what's interesting is a lot of the other courses I took, like, making bombs in chemistry class or nylon or something else, it's odd. I look back at those things now and they were really educational.
If you are taught to read and taught to read critically, as you progress through the educational system, you eventually get to the point, and for most people, I think this would happen in college, at the college level, although the brighter students like you who nailed the SAT and, and I know you did.
Yeah.
You got a perfect score, didn't you?
Yeah, I got a perfect SAT
Yeah.
also on language. So I didn't have to take all those prep classes.
Well, I did,
Yeah.
including English composition, and now I think I write pretty damn well, yeah, pretty darn well. But anyway,
Hey, we're running out of time. You got one more minute.
Oh my God, Dick, you got to throw away that stopwatch. I got more to say. I need another hour.
Well, YouTube is claiming our podcasts are too long.
Yeah.
So,
well, let me get to my point then.
Well, I had to resubmit 2 of them because they pulled them down for being too long.
Okay, I'll make this quick. When you get to the college level, and some of the brighter people begin doing this in the high school level, but along with textbooks per se, you start reading supplemental lists of books. In other words, you don't get a textbook on US history, you go back to original texts. And that's why in good colleges, even for a single class, you get a syllabus with a book list that, is going to break the bank. But some of that is, you can see right behind me. And as an example, and quickly, the beauty of Lincoln's writing, his second inaugural address. I think every American ought to be conversant in Lincoln's second inaugural address, and particularly now in these days and times. The famous line, with malice towards none. We're in the midst of a civil war, and Lincoln already wants to bind up the nation's wounds, and he's talking about with malice towards none. And all that's going on today is malice directed at every turn. And there's so much to be learned. That's one little example of knowing history. But one of our greatest presidents, who was determined to preserve the Union at any cost, nonetheless said the words, or wrote the words, said and wrote them, with malice towards none.
Okay, I'm going to have to cut you off. We're going to have to continue this next week because YouTube is going to tell us this is too long.
Well, okay. Sounds like Facebook censorship, but whatever.
Okay, talk to you next week.